Hello, Comparative Religions, and this week we are starting a new unit on Egypt and Egyptian religion. Now, so far we've talked about the origins of religion, we've looked at organized religion, we've looked at God and the characteristics of God. We've talked about naturalistic polytheism and the belief in nature spirits. And we even looked at Mesopotamia and early Mesopotamian civilization that kind of represents this change from naturalistic polytheism to polytheism with many gods. And that's where we're going to pick up the story here with ancient Egypt. And we're going to talk about religions and mythology in ancient Egypt. Now, I've broken up this unit into two lessons, okay, to make it very manageable for you guys. The first one that we're going to do today goes into the background of Egypt, goes into the background of the religion, and then the second part gets into a little bit more detail with some religious practices and some religious ideas, okay? As we go through these two lessons, be sure you are taking your own notes, okay? I will try to tell you what to copy down and what not to copy down. Um, but feel free to take whatever notes that you want, okay? The information contained in this lesson is going to be on a big assessment dealing with Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Okay, those are our big polytheistic societies, and we'll group them all together on a little assessment. Okay, so let's talk about ancient Egypt here. Now, let's go into some background. Okay, not too much on this slide that you need to copy down, but I want to give you a little bit of history about Egypt that impacts the religious belief. Okay, so I don't think you need to copy anything down on this first slide here, but we know that Egypt is centered around the Nile River valleys. Okay, the Nile River plays a very, very crucial role in Egyptian life. All right, the flooding of the Nile is necessary to sustain agriculture in Egypt. In fact, the areas right around the Nile are very, very fertile. Okay, now Egypt goes through a series of kingdoms, it goes through a series of rulers. The first time that is united as a whole is around 3000 BCE. And not only is Egypt united then, but also that is the time that we see the written language hieroglyphics develop. Okay, so Egypt gets united around 3000 BCE, and we see their written language hieroglyphics emerge at the same time. Now, much like Persia, Egypt is going to be conquered by Alexander the Great. Okay, it will end at 332 BCE. All right, the Egypt that we know will end around 332 BCE when it's conquered by Alexander. Okay, now Egypt will continue to exist. You will have Cleopatra, of course, and of course, Cleopatra is linked with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, who come after Alexander the Great. But the Egyptian Empire will end around 332. Its history is broken up into three main periods: the Old Period, the Middle Period, and the New Kingdom. Okay, those are the three divisions within Egyptian history. All right, so that's kind of the background as we get into the religious belief. Okay, now politically, the ruler of Egypt is the Pharaoh. And that's where religious belief is going to start. And I do want you to get down this slide right here, okay? Essentially, the leader of Egypt, the Pharaoh, is worshipped. The Pharaoh is considered a god. He is the son of the sun god. And because he is the son of the sun god, he is a god as well. Now, we talked about Hammurabi with Mesopotamia and the fact that the Hammurabi code, the legal code that Hammurabi creates, is unique. Well, here's a good example why that code is unique, because in Egypt, justice was not based on a code of laws, but on the decision of the Pharaoh. So, how the Pharaoh felt that day, or how the Pharaoh felt about you specifically, would determine the ruling in a case. Okay, there was no set grouping of laws that the Pharaoh would follow. It depended on how he felt at that time. Okay, so that's why Hammurabi's code is kind of a big deal, and the fact that we have this codified law, right? The symbols that we associate with the pharaoh are the pyramids. Okay, the pyramids were the houses of the pharaoh after the pharaoh died. And there's a lot of symbolism in the pyramids, especially a belief in life after death. The pharaoh god would return to the company of those who passed before. And we talked about this when we were talking about burial practices and things like that related to early religion. We talked about how what a person is buried with is significant. That's why the pyramids are so important. That's why the contents of the pyramids are so important, because of this belief that the pharaoh god is going to return to the company of those who passed before. He's going to need everything he would have here in the afterlife with those people that have passed before him. So that's why we have the furniture and the chariots. There are other mummies in the tomb, like the mummies of beloved pets. We talked about the fact that there was sometimes there were mass suicides, and the pharaoh's wife and the pharaoh's servants and their families often committed suicide in the pyramid as well, and were enclosed in the pyramid with the pharaoh because of the idea that they would travel with him to the afterlife. So, a key component to Egyptian religion is this figure of the pharaoh, who's not only the political leader, but is also seen as a god as well and is worshipped as a god. Egypt is polytheistic, and that polytheism centers around animal cults. The deities, and I want you to get this slide down as well, the deities in these animal cults are either complete animals or as some sort of animal human hybrid. Okay, they're semi animals, and you see this in the, or semi human, you see this in the art right here. Okay, you have the falcon, the eagle head on the body of a man. Now, there are three explanations for this. Okay, and I want you to get these three explanations down. One explanation is they are left over from earlier totem images. So this could be influenced from that naturalistic polytheism, the belief in nature spirits, the belief in animism. This could be left over from an earlier belief system, or maybe an early belief system that came into contact with the Egyptians. Okay, so they're left over from earlier totem images. Because there are so many gods in Egyptian religion, it is possible that the different animals distinguish the different gods. Okay, a lot of the gods had similar powers and similar roles. So, how do you distinguish between this god, who is the sun god, and I'm just using that as an example, and this god, who is also the sun god or has power of the sun? Well, you create two different images. Okay, this god is represented by this animal, this god is represented by another animal, but they have the same powers, they have the same roles. Okay, then the third explanation is the pharaoh is god in human form, so the other deities, the other gods, must take the form of an animal. So we got a polytheistic society, we got many gods here. A lot of those gods resemble animals, and these are three possible explanations as to why that is. They're left over from an earlier religion, okay, or an early totem image. They distinguish between gods who have similar roles, similar powers, and the human image of God is the pharaoh. So the other gods are going to be animals or some sort of animal human hybrid. Now, each god, each animal god, is going to have its own cult, its own group of religious followers around it. All right. So that's why we talk about the animal cults, and the animal cults being so important, is each one is connected to a specific Egyptian god or goddess. Okay. Now, speaking of these gods and goddesses, and I want you to get down this slide as well. As we've talked about, these gods and goddesses are based in nature, right? Um, they have They look like animals. They have control over cosmic forces. They are connected to cosmic references. And I've got that question there. What type of religion is this? All right. This is definitely influenced by naturalistic polytheism and that belief in nature spirits. Okay. So this is a good example. If you believe in the evolution of religion, where we start with these spirits and over time these spirits become gods and goddesses, what we see in Egypt is a good example of that. Now, I mentioned the sun god earlier. There are a bunch of sun gods besides Pharaoh, who is the son of the sun god and also a god himself. You have Horus, you have Atum, and the most familiar sun god is Ra. Okay, so that's again, this helps explain why we have these different animal deities, because here are three examples of the sun god, and we have to distinguish between those three. So we come up with different animals to represent each one. Now, a very important goddess is Ma'at. Okay, and be sure you get this down. Ma'at is the goddess of truth and world order. It is Pharaoh's job to keep Ma'at happy. If Ma'at is not happy, chaos is going to return. It's kind of like Pandora's box, okay? We need to keep chaos bottled up. We need to keep Ma'at happy, because if she's not, she's going to unleash chaos into the world, okay, and all kinds of craziness. She's going to unleash hell upon the world, okay. So the Pharaoh must keep Ma'at happy. Again, and we saw this with Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia had over 2,000 gods and goddesses. There are a bunch of deities in Egypt. And just like we looked at, we saw that slide that had kind of this family tree of the gods and goddesses in Mesopotamia. In Egypt, the deities are organized into family groups as well, probably to create some sort of order and some sort of connection between the gods and goddesses, because there's so many. Okay, so we're trying to make it easier to organize. Plus, again, you have all these gods and goddesses that have similar powers and similar roles. It would be nice to organize them in some way so you know who we're talking about. Now, I want to give you an example of one of these. You do not have to copy down what is on the next slide, okay? But we're going to talk about Isis, Osiris, and Horus. Osiris was a god, and Osiris was killed by his brother Seth. Seth stole Osiris's third eye, which was a symbol of kingship. And I'll be honest with you, the third eye also kind of represents the sun, and we'll talk more about that later. Isis was a sister to Osiris and a sister to Seth. Isis found Osiris's body and wept over Osiris. And between hugging him, hugging his corpse, and crying over him, he came to life long enough to impregnate her. The result of that union was Horus. Horus decided to get revenge on Seth, and he took justice into his own hands and killed Seth and reclaimed that third eye that Seth had stolen from Osiris. Now, what this story represents, besides connecting Seth and Osiris and Isis and Horus together, is it represents good over evil. The naturalistic polytheism influence, that third eye, okay, represents the sun, okay, and this sun god, whose earthly offspring is the Pharaoh, this sun god is responsible for the growing seasons, okay? Just as we see life and resurrection in this story of Osiris and Isis and Horus, this third eye is going to watch over the crops in Egypt and is going to help with the life and resurrection of grain and other crops in the soil. Okay? Now, what's interesting, and we've talked about this before, how religion impacts other areas. Isis is often associated with Egypt, but the worship of Isis is also going to head into Greek society and Roman society, which makes sense because we know Alexander the Great conquers Greece. I mean, Alexander the Great from Greece conquers Egypt, and then Rome is going to conquer Greece as well. So we keep seeing this idea of worship of Isis get spread from Egypt to Greece and then from Greece to Rome. Okay. Now, real quickly, that's just kind of a little background to Egypt. Again, we're dealing with a polytheistic society. We talked a little bit about the history. We talked about the importance of Pharaoh. We talked about a little bit of the evolution from naturalistic polytheism to the worship of many gods, polytheism itself. In our next lesson, we're going to talk briefly about monotheism in Egypt, okay? And then we're going to get into some more specific religious practices within Egyptian society.